You can buy a chef's knife on Amazon, at IKEA, or at a dollar store for about $20. For instance, I just bought this one from Dollarama for $5. And I would wager that the average person's kitchen knife looks and performs something like this one. It gets chucked into drawers, it gets run through the dishwasher, and it opens the occasional Amazon package. And it kind of works. Now, my chef's knives are currently priced in the range of about $400 to $600. And for the person that has a $5 knife, that is absolutely insane. And that's not entirely wrong, because if high-performance kitchen knives aren't words that you've ever strung together, then respectfully, you're not my core customer. But think instead about the comparison between a low-quality and a high-quality product of something you care about, whether that's a house, a car, a bed, golf clubs, food, coffee beans, you name it. Most of the time, you get what you pay for. Okay, now let's land the plane here. Why is all of this relevant to me in today's video? I'm going to try to elevate my knife making game to make a couple of knives that are worthy of even higher price tags than what I normally make. Believe it or not, I have a vision for a small batch of knives that are going to be about 3 to 5 times more expensive than a knife like this. So how exactly am I estimating those costs? There is tons of online content on YouTube, on Reddit, on a bunch of knife forums about how to price handmade knives. And while it's all absolutely true and fantastic advice, it's also almost always generic. You know, cover your costs, your materials, your labor, your overhead, your consumables. Price your labor according to the quality of the products that you can provide. Know the market that you're selling to. Have an ideal customer in mind, etc., etc. So in addition to the build of this small batch of very expensive knives, I'm also going to walk through exactly how I'm going to price them. That's something that I have yet to see in the knife making community, so I hope this is relevant, makes sense, and adds some value to you. So first and foremost, my ideal customer for any of these knives is a professional chef or home cook, someone who's a knife collector or knife enthusiast, basically someone that values highly functional art. It's going to be someone that appreciates the performance of a good steel, the ergonomics of a thoughtfully designed blade, and the uniqueness of a handcrafted piece of art. Here's a chart that I whipped together to showcase exactly how I'm estimating the prices that I hope to ask for when I'm finished this small batch of premium knives. Now, I'm just going over all of my costs, my time and materials, so it might look like a lot, but it's relatively simple. We'll walk through it all. So I'm starting out with some pre-made billets of pattern-welded damascus. The first billet here was personally forged by Tobias Hangler that I bought from him directly when I was there at his shop back in March making my S-grind chef's knife. It is an Apex Ultra Core, which is Tobias's proprietary culinary-inspired steel, and 30-layer Damascus cladding. That cost me €282, so with the conversion it came out to 454 Canadian dollars for this billet. These other two stunning billets are W2 and 15N20 and were forged by Hunter and his dad from HHH Custom Knives in Michigan, just across the border from me in Windsor, Ontario. These cost me 1,117 Canadian delivered. And here's my plan for the profiles. So I'll make them all hidden tangs so I can maximize the amount of usable steel. I'll get 2 overlapping on each of the large billets, and hopefully I'll get 4 smaller paring knives out of the smaller billet. So here you can see the names. The Christie and the Gustavo are going to be the large K-tip and the large Gyuto. The Kelly and the Gary will be the K-tip style and the Gyuto style, but a shrunken down version for the paring knives. So I'll probably do them in matching pairs. So here we have the model name and just my cost for the steel based on the models that I'm going to pull out of here. Now the handle blocks are also very expensive. These ones here were $100 a piece, and the other ebony ones are about $50. Now with the larger blocks, I'm probably going to be able to split them down the middle to get 2 handles out of the block, but I have to keep in mind the grain orientation. So if I want it to face a certain way, I might not be able to do that. But generally, my cost for each handle on a knife like this will be about $50. So here I have my miscellaneous costs. Now that is my brass bolsters, my epoxy, the dowels that go inside of it, things like that. So looking at all of this, this is the sum of just the materials, what I spent to get the things that I've shown so far, just over $2,000. And as a business, I have to mark up these materials, so I'm marking them up by 50%. So my material cost to the customer is going to be about $3,000 for all of this stuff. Now, onto my labor. I'm charging myself $50 an hour for all the work that I do. But generally speaking, this is the labor that I have to put into each individual knife. So for the larger ones, it's 12 hours, and the smaller ones I'm estimating will be about 8. Oftentimes I do a lot more work than that, but it's not fair to charge the customer for it. This could change throughout the build, but based on my experience as a knife maker, this is kind of where I'm fluctuating. So for this batch of knives, it'll take me approximately 80 hours, and charging $50 an hour is about $4 grand in labor costs. And this column K here is the sum of the materials and the labor for each individual knife, which has a total of about $7,000. Now, as much as this all might seem, there are a whole bunch of extras that as a business you have to consider. Consumables. My biggest consumable is my abrasive sanding belts. They're about $10 to $15 each, and for a batch this size, I'm going to go through a bunch of them. So somewhere in the ballpark of $100 to $200 worth of belts just for these. Another massive cost in knife making is the heat treatment. So I don't heat treat in-house, not yet. I outsource to A&M Heat Treating in Mississauga. They do a fantastic job, but that's another major expense that I have to add to the prices of my products, especially in a smaller batch, because they typically charge a batch fee. So prorated per knife, it becomes a lot more with a smaller batch. So I've got business overhead as well. And lastly, we have the art, scarcity, and brand premium. So on the brand side, I'm relatively new with Divide knives, so I don't think it's really fair or reasonable to add much there. But this is a small batch of really good, beautiful steel that will have a good heat treatment that I'll manage well with the techniques and the tools that I have. So at the end, the way it looks and performs will be dependent on the final price, but I'm hoping that I'll end up with really, really highly functional art, which is how we land at about a 30% extra on top of the time and materials, inclusive of all of these things. So these should be about where I'll land for the final prices to charge the customer, for a total of $91.66. I might round this off for clean numbers, but that's that. Now I typically use a slightly different way to calculate my knives, but the price ends up the same. What I don't do is include these extras as an additional percentage. I would just either adjust the way I calculate my materials, being more inclusive with the things like the belts, and then kind of just to give a justification on why I might increase my labor rate as I get more experienced as a knife maker. And this is what I think is a reasonable price to ask. It covers my materials with a reasonable margin, it pays me properly for my time based on my current skill level, and it adds a reasonable premium for art, scarcity, and craftsmanship. Now these are subject to change, of course, throughout the build, but I do feel like these are pretty accurate. And now the fun and challenging part begins, because now I have to make these knives. I have to spend 80 hours to make sure that I don't ruin any of these materials, and I can reasonably charge this amount at the end of the day when they're all finished. I'm not sure what I did, but I cracked my knife. It's about 2 centimeters in from the tip. I'm down to almost 0, and I was just doing some flattening along the edge. Slow speed, wet grinding on my 220. And I don't know if I dropped it somewhere, or if that was just a stress in the steel. But that's a bummer. And I don't know what happened, which is even worse. But like we say in knife making, we don't make mistakes, we just make smaller knives. So here is the Apex Gyudo up to a 600 grit finish, and that's compared to the rough side from the grinder. But I was hand sanding this, I realized that I'm actually extremely grateful that that crack happened near the tip. So while it's unfortunate I lost about 2 centimeters, I maintained a similar profile and didn't have to change the bevel. If that crack had formed anywhere along the body or near the heel of that cutting edge, I would have had to grind up into it along the entire length. And that would have been a lot more work, and possibly even would have been a scrap blank. So that it's unfortunate, but you know what? I'll take it. And now I've got to make this side and all of these knives look like this before I take it to the Scotch-Brite belt for a satin finish, and then we can etch. And I'm thinking I might buff this as well. Now that this one is clean and polished, I don't want it to rust while I sand the others, so I'm going to apply a heavy coat of blade wax, and this will get cleaned off before I put it in ferric. It's been about 3 weeks since I've started working on this batch of Damascus knives. My two Apex knives are just about to get their second coat of oil on the handles. They turned out fantastic. These three Lightning Damascus turned out great, and these three not so great. Come take a look. So, very unfortunately, after I bought this beautiful, very expensive specialized steel, got a very expensive specialized heat treatment, and then spent a lot of time doing a specialized grind on it to get a nice distal taper. Everything is smooth and round. It's dead straight. It's dead thin. After all of that, I went to etch it, and I realized that there's a problem with the steel, both with this one and with this one. And it runs through both sides. It's not just surface impurities. I'm not able to sand that out. This does run through the blade, and it's close to the cutting edge. So this will affect the overall performance, and it is visual. I'm not sure if the camera picks it up, but in the light, it's very noticeable, this blotchy patch right here. I don't know if that is a forging issue or a heat treatment issue, possibly both, possibly neither. I'm going to do some digging into what exactly this is, but because this will affect not only the aesthetics, but the performance especially, I don't know what I'm going to do with these two knives yet, which is why they're not glued. But that's a bummer. I really wanted to have this beautiful Carillion birch from my man Florian in Austria on this knife, because I love this profile, but that's just the way she goes in knife making. So again, it's unfortunate, but pressing on. The third knife here, the steel is fine, but my error, if you noticed, I didn't put any clamping pressure with this style of knife, and I never usually do, and this is the only time this has actually ever happened to me. It didn't sit even, so you can see visibly the black epoxy as it cured between the bolster and the wood. Now, this is just an aesthetic issue in the handle. Again, for a premium knife, I'm not going to be able to charge full price for this, so I'll discount this knife heavily. Be open and honest with the customer. If they're okay with being able to see that line there, they're going to get a gorgeous paring knife at a significant discount. So that's what happened with these three knives. This one is salvageable. I don't quite know what I'll do with these yet. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But I've got these four to finish up, polish, and oil, and then I'll take some glamour shots to show you at the end. Most of the work is done, and I'm really excited to see how these turn out for the final photos. And quickly over here, if you're curious about these three, this was a custom commission from a lifelong friend of mine, Jenna, who bought this as a Father's Day gift for her husband and my buddy Greg. Greg is a firefighter and has always wanted one of my Damascus knives. So I found this beautiful fire-themed handle from William Woodwright that turned out just gorgeous. This thing is going to be an absolute weapon. There's no edge on it yet, but it's got a zero grind as I usually do, and it's already taken off a chunk of my finger. These three are all engraved with their names, and then my logo is on the back. This one here is a tiny one engraved with the name of their 6-month-old daughter. So happy Father's Day, Greg. Hope you enjoy these. This batch of knives is finally finished, and they look sick. I am really proud of myself for how these turned out. And now that they're done, my job as a knife maker is over, and my job as a business is just getting started. Because I now have to find a couple of customers that are hopefully going to agree with the value that I'm placing on my work, which for the record was pretty accurate based on my initial estimations. This large Lightning is going to go for $1,600. The two Apex are going to go for $1,400 a piece. These two paring knives are going to go for $600. It was a little less work than I originally planned, which is good. And the one with the visible epoxy along the bolster is going to go for a 50% discount to $300. Now, in my opinion, the form is absolutely dialed. But what matters the most with knives is the function. So we're going to end the video doing some test cutting. First up is the control, which I'm going to wager isn't going to do very well. Now let's try mine.